So the president tweeted this morning, so now it's reported that the Democrats who have excoriated Carter Page about Russia don't want him to testify. He blows away their case against him and now wants to clear his name by showing the false or misleading testimony by James Comey, John Brennan, witch hunt.
Again, I'm confused now. Does he know Carter Page, or does he not know Carter Page? Because in the past, I mean, he told the Washington Post that Carter Page was an advisor.
Right.
And then afterwards, they backed away saying, wait, we don't, who? Carter Page. Who is this Carter Page you speak of?
What's going to be so helpful is that...
And now he's talking about Carter Page.
Nobody tweets except the president, and nobody can get into his Twitter account.
Right.
So these tweets will be really helpful in the court of law.
It's going to be really helpful. I mean, every time this president tweets, especially about the investigation, he only helps the FBI.
Because these are his words that no one has access to.
His lawyers have already told him, don't tweet about this stuff.
Well, that was the feeling before he left on the trip, that he was going to rein it in for his own legal benefit. This does not help him to be talking about an ongoing investigation. He can't help himself, as we saw last night from midnight to 6 a.m. as the tweet was up all night.
Which confirms again that nobody has access to his account, and that all those words are his and nobody else's. The congressional probes to the ties between Russia and President Trump's 2016 campaign appear to be expanding. The president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, tells NBC News he will testify if subpoenaed to appear. Cohen earlier said that he has received requests for information from the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, but wouldn't comply because the request was overly broad and not capable of being answered, adding that he was waiting for a subpoena. Quote, I have nothing to hide. Cohen has denied claims in a dossier prepared by a former British spy that he took part in a secret meeting in Prague to discuss hacking Democratic targets. Meanwhile, the House Intelligence Committee has asked former Trump communications staffer Boris Epstein to volunteer information. Epstein left just after 2 months in the White House. His counsel says he's following up with the committee. And a source close to Michael Flynn says the former national security advisor will provide some personal documents subpoenaed by the Senate Intelligence Committee in its Russia probe. Flynn refused to cooperate with an earlier subpoena, invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. All this as the White House seemed to avoid an answer on the controversy surrounding Jared Kushner's meeting with Russian officials and a Russian state banker.
I'm wondering, Sean, if you can tell us when the president knew, whether the president knew at the time that Jared Kushner was seeking to establish back-channel communications at the Russian embassy to the Russian government. And if he didn't know at the time, when did he find out?
I think that assumes a lot, and I would just say that Mr. Kushner's attorney has said that Mr. Kushner has volunteered to share with Congress what he knows about these meetings, and he will do the same if he's contacted or connected with any other inquiry.
Did the president discuss it, though?
I'm not going to get into what the president did or did not discuss, but what your question assumes is a lot of facts that are not substantiated by anything but anonymous sources that are so far being leaked out.
Does he approve of that action?
You're asking if he approves of an action that is not a confirmed action. That being said, I think Secretary Kelly and General McMaster have both discussed that in general terms, back channels are an appropriate part of diplomacy.
So Jeremy Bash, it's interesting, the White House really has provided no defense for Jared Kushner over the past several days. Certainly didn't provide any defense yesterday. If you're Jared Kushner and you see 6 people inside the White House, not 2 unnamed sources, but 6 piling on in New York Times stories, it might be a rational approach to begin to get paranoid.
Yeah, the best they've been able to muster is that back channels are a normal feature of diplomacy, and that may be true in the abstract, but of course in this specific case there's so many things that make this back channel unusual. First of all, going to the Russian embassy and using their phones, that's something I've never heard of. Second is the timing before the inauguration taking place against the long tradition we have of one president at a time. But third, interestingly, the topic that was supposedly going to be discussed, Syria. You know, we have troops on the ground in Syria. We have several hundred special operations forces. They're conducting missions against ISIS in Raqqa. They're doing other activities on the ground there. The idea that you would be negotiating with a Syrian or Russian military official affecting what's happening on the ground. That is dangerous. It is dangerous to our troops. It is dangerous to what we're trying to do in country. That could risk lives. And without the benefit of career, senior, professional military advice, it is something that really needs to be looked at and figured out what happened during that pre-inauguration time period.
And by the way, the Syria thing just doesn't hold water. Nobody believes it. I don't think anybody in the White House even believes that they were trying to make contact because of that. But as Jeremy was talking about, and not talking to Trump's personal lawyer, and we may move towards financial contacts with Russia. It's only a matter of time before Don Jr. Gets called in there, as well as Eric, who have both said that they got a good bit of their money from Russia.
They're interesting figures in all this because they've sort of been sidelined as the focus has been on Ivanka and Jared for obvious reasons because they're in the West Wing at the White House. But Don Jr. and Eric continue to run the Trump family businesses. And as you point out, they've said publicly that we do a lot of our business with Russia. So I think they'll be swept up into this eventually. Also want to point out in the White House briefing room yesterday, Sean Spicer was asked to account for President Trump's retweet of a Fox News article, which was itself based on a single anonymous source that refuted other reports about Jared Kushner's meeting with Russian officials, just as Spicer was decrying the Washington Post Kushner reporting for its use of anonymous officials.
You said that first of all, that the article was based on anonymous sources.
Which it is.
But the Fox article that the president retweeted was also based on anonymous sources. Why are those sources, or the source rather, that they used more credible than the ones in the Washington Post article?
Again, I don't think there's two issues at hand. One is the statement that Jared's attorney has provided. Second is whether or not the dossier that is largely the basis of this was largely discredited in the first place. Most of the publications here refused to even publish it in the first place. So again, I'm not going to get into confirming stuff. There's an ongoing investigation.
So the reporter in the room there is correct. The article that Donald Trump retweeted yesterday had no byline on it from FoxNews.com and had a single source. So if you're going to decry anonymous sources, you can't have it both ways.
Right. And again, as we were saying before, in the Jared article, you have 6, 7, 8 sources, White House sources. And of course, that's the great irony is that every time Spicer goes out of there after decrying anonymous sources, you have reporters who then say, hey, how many times, Spicer, have you talked to us on the background as an unnamed source, which is often.
And routine backgrounders of the White House does with reporters on important topics. It's actually a practice that is kind of out of control, that routine matters are dealt with on background. But if there's a problem with anonymity and blind sources, it's not just in the press, it's the White House as well.